Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Building Better Brains. Today I want to talk about why you might not be seeing results, why you might be feeling like you've tried this and you've tried that, and maybe exactly why your child is feeling frustrated and because they are not seeing the results as well. And basically I so often see kids and parents where they've tried this intervention, and this is where self-esteem can really start to get affected, especially if a child's been struggling with this for quite a few years. And basically where motivation can really start to decline because kids are smart and they're not seeing the results. So that's why they've lost that motivation. And I kind of compare it to the real root of the problem is that we are trying to put a roof on a house that does not yet have a foundation built or a really sturdy foundation. So you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. And so often when we do this with an approach with the brain and we start working in what's called a top-down approach, so we start working on skills instead of like connections in the brain and underdeveloped areas of the brain, I really compare this to the same problem that we do in medicine. It's symptom management. So if a child has a reading difficulty, I've talked about this lots, we work on phonics and so forth. We're not working on the true root cause. So in brain science or neuroscience, we call this a top-down approach. And we start working up here, basically where the cortex is, or the top of the learning pyramid. And if you've been following me for a while, I talk about the learning pyramid and how the motor and vestibular system has to be strong first for those other aspects to work well. And then further up the learning pyramid are those skills that really let us know that kids are doing well and thriving and so forth. So if we want to improve our children's cognition, their focus, their reasoning, their reading ability, their memory, all of that type of stuff, we need to improve the skills and we need to work on the lower brain levels so that their cortex can be functioning optimally. But so often, because the cortex is where all the skills take place, we're basically working on the cortex and the foundation, which is the lower brain levels, is weak. And so the first thing I want to just make really clear, because I know for most people this is, all new information, is that the cortex is the youngest part of our brain, evolutionary speaking. And so it really is like the roof. It's the last part of the brain that developed on an evolutionary level. And interestingly, it's the last part of the brain that develops in development. So what it boils down to is that the brain develops from infancy and on in the same way that it evolved from the bottom up. And so if there are weak connections, a shaky foundation, underdeveloped areas in those lower levels, in our more primitive levels, then it's not going to be strong as we go up. And that is why so often we don't see results, or results are so slow, because we're just trying to get the cortex to do something that it's not able to do because it's busy doing something that the lower brain levels are not able to do. It's busy compensating. So if we basically are not addressing the root cause or the reality of how the brain develops, then this is where we're going to have a lot of breakdown and so forth. And let me know, can you relate to this? Is this something you're seeing where your child is not seeing results? What exactly are you trying? What are you frustrated with? Whether it's learning, behavior, focus, emotional regulation, sensory processing, whatever the case may be, maybe all of the above. And I should mention February 27th, it's a Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern, I will be doing a free live masterclass all about these approaches and laying out my 3 secrets and so forth. But anyway, so again, the lower brain level must be developed. And so I want to just talk first. I want to be clear, because this can be kind of confusing if this is all new, of what is called a top-down approach and what are the symptoms and what are the strategies that we use when we do what's called a top-down approach, and we're trying to get working on the skills or improving the processing, and how that is all wrong. So, and I don't want to say that these other top-down approaches are wrong, but if you do it at the wrong time. So it's definitely helpful to do phonics with kids. You know, it's definitely helpful if a child has anxiety to address, you know, to go to counseling. But if we are addressing that first and this foundation is shaky, then we're going to have a lot of, we're not going to see the results that we really want to see. And we might actually see no results or very few results, and it might get very, very frustrating to the point where a child totally shuts down. So top-down approaches look like things like phonics or remedial reading for dyslexia, behavior modification plans or medication for kids with ADHD, you know, parenting classes and strategies for kids who have ODD. I mentioned counseling for anxiety, IEPs, tutoring, remedial reading programs, all that type of stuff for kids with learning disabilities. For kids who have sensory processing disorder, we might take them to OT. We might find, you know, tagless, seamless clothes, and we're just kind of working around the sensory processing issues instead of addressing why it's happening. And again, medication and IEPs for everything from ADHD to ODD to OCD, anxiety, and so forth. Those are all top-down approaches. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying that all of these approaches should not be used or that they are totally hogwash, but we need to do them at the right time, and we need to recognize that they are compensations, they are modifications, ultimately they are band-aids, and they are not going to get to the root of the problem. So let me know if any of these approaches that I've mentioned. Share in the comments below if you have tried any of this, if this is what you're doing. And if this is your kind of first line of action and last line of action, that's where the problem is. It is okay if a kid, you know, is really struggling with learning and behavior or, you know, aggression, and maybe they need medication temporarily, or they're on an IEP, and that IEP is to kind of get them through you know, grade whatever, and to keep up and keep their confidence up. But it definitely should not be a permanent solution. The permanent solution, the next line of action, should be addressing the root cause so that ultimately that IEP can fall away. And so those are top-down approaches. So it's about making life more manageable. And again, it's great for preventing a child from falling behind in class and so forth, but it does not optimize their brain function. It does not improve the weak connections. It ultimately does not improve their learning ability and so forth, or their focus or behavior or emotional regulation. So what we really want to be doing is, if we're implementing some of those top-down approaches to kind of get them through a tough time, that's fine. But what we really want to be doing, the real solution here, is getting into what are called bottom-up approaches, bottom-up development. As I said, the brain develops from the bottom up, and we cannot start, you know, if there's problems, start working from the top and just think that things are going to filter down, because it's just not going to happen. So bottom-up approaches are things like, number one, addressing the biochemistry and how that's going to affect brain function. So it might be things like addressing nutritional deficiencies. And yes, there can even be genetic factors. Certain families don't metabolize, you know, certain nutrients very well. And there can be huge gains when we do that, especially giving them bioavailable nutrients. It can also be things like overgrowth of yeast or bad bacteria in the gut. And yes, this does not just apply to autism or ADHD. I can't tell you how many kids make amazing progress with focus, concentration, clarity of thought, even reading ability, reading comprehension, memory, when we start working on the biochemistry and addressing gut health. And again, things like toxicity, food allergies, food sensitivities, all of that type of stuff. And then other bottom-up approaches are things like brain organization, addressing weak connections in the brain, addressing retained primitive reflexes, which I've been getting into the last couple of weeks, addressing things like brain imbalance. Is there a really developed, overdeveloped left hemisphere of the brain and what we call a right brain deficiency, as is the case in ADHD and autism? Or as is the case in dyslexia, is it a overdeveloped right brain and a left brain deficiency? And the left brain is where the language center is, and they're reading from the right brain. So they're reading on manual instead of automatic. And once we start doing targeted exercises that develop those weak connections, that develop those underdeveloped areas of the brain and integrate those primitive reflex, all of a sudden the cortex is free to do all of this learning and focusing and emotional regulation that it was not free to do before because it was too busy addressing the lower brain levels. And so basically the idea is, imagine that your child breaks their leg, and before we have set the leg and realigned the bones properly so it can heal properly, we're just slapping a cast on there. So maybe they can get along and the bone will kind of heal, but it's always going to be a problem. Yeah, your child will be able to walk eventually, but it's always going to be a problem. And we don't ultimately, I don't want that for your child. I didn't want that for my child. We want to set the leg, then put the cast on it, let it heal properly, do the exercises, the physio, I call it physio for the brain in terms of what I do, to get it functioning optimally. So again, I will be talking about this in my masterclass on Saturday, February 27th, which is next weekend, all about the difference between top-down and bottom-up approaches and how bottom-up approaches are ultimately the way to overcome these difficulties so that your child is not just managing or compensating for the rest of their life. And so if this seems like out there, you've never heard of this, you've just been told you can't overcome these struggles and you just have to learn to manage it, keep in mind this is coming from people or experts or research that is based on what they've seen with people doing conventional approaches. The research of people doing bottom-up approaches is very well researched. And in fact, there's a study, I've posted it on my website, about primitive reflexes and how all of the children in the study who had learning disabilities and behavior issues had retained primitive reflexes, meaning they had an immature brain development. Once that was addressed in as little as 12 weeks, there was huge gains with these kids. And 12 weeks isn't much. In my programs, we do 6 months and possibly even onward. And again, if this seems far-fetched, I get it. I've been there too. I really encourage you to join me on February 27th on Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And I will be talking about the 3 secrets I use, how to move past Band-Aid solutions, and why there is so many kids struggling more than ever, why autism is spiking, learning disabilities like dyslexia, ADHD. Our kids are not well in a lot of ways. It's not just better diagnosis. I've talked about this before, about the peanut allergy, right? If it was just better diagnosis, we wouldn't have so many kids allergic to everything. Something is really off biochemically, as well as in terms of brain structure or brain organization, and that can be changed. And that's the most exciting part. And I'm really excited to be talking about this next weekend. So I will post the sign up link in the comments below, and I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching. Bye.